Christopher.
What's up, Jason?
Dude, booking Rails comp stuff.
I know. We're going to be there.
You said, I need to book my Rails comp stuff. And the next thing I know, like 20 minutes later, we're splitting a hotel room and I have a flight.
Yeah. Yeah, we move fast.
Good week?
Yeah, I can't believe it's Friday already and just kind of disappeared. So it's one of those that just, goes by really, really fast when you're busy. So I guess that's good, but it makes you remember like back when in school, grade school, you felt like every day took like a week. Now it's like every week takes like a day. It's crazy.
Yeah, my last 3 weeks have been like that. Like yesterday, Spencer at work was like, "Hey, I'm gonna like have you fix bugs the rest of the week," and I was like, "What? The rest of the week?" And I was like, "Oh, tomorrow's Friday. That's just like one day."
Yeah, lucky you, right?
Yeah, please always ask me on Thursday to work on something for the rest of the week.
That's fantastic.
So today we are joined by Terence Lee. Terence, do you want to maybe just give a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure. Well, yeah, my name's Terence. It's a good start. I work at Heroku. I've been there for coming up on 9 years. It'll be 9 years in April, so it's been a long time. And done stuff all over the Ruby ecosystem, probably most well known for some of my early work in the older bundler days. And a lot of the, I guess, like if you've deployed something on Heroku, you've used something that I've worked on.
9 years, that makes you like OG Heroku, right?
Yeah, I think I'm like employee 16 or 17 in overall. And then there's only like 3 other employees who are older than me at this point, or 4, something like that.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome. How long have you been specifically working with or around Ruby?
I feel like I started in college, and I want to say like around 2005, 6, like Rails 1.0 kind of days.
And was it Rails 1.0, was it Rails that interested you in Ruby, or was it actually the language itself?
It was definitely Rails that first got me into Ruby. I think a lot of people around that time who were coming to Ruby came from like PHP and were looking for something that like a lot of things that made Rails really attractive even today, like back then, especially if you rewind back over 10 years ago, was like this like structure, the app directory layout, dry, all that stuff, which PHP definitely had if you look for it, but it wasn't there like out of the box.
That's awesome. So shifting gears, I guess, a little bit, you actually are actively on Rails core. I think you mentioned before the call that you don't work with it as much on the team, but I guess, how did you find yourself onto Ruby core?
Yeah, so I got onto Ruby core because at Heroku we were supporting, we have these stacks that back in the day where you had like a version of Ruby on a specific stack, and then we've released like multiple Ruby support on like our Cedar stack, which is probably what most people are on. And the default stack at the time was, I think when we first launched it for Cedar, was like 1.9.2, the version of Ruby. So when Ruby core decided to like sunset Ruby 1.9.2, we realized we had a ton of customers on it, just because most people weren't specifying their versions of Ruby for the app. So by default, you're going to get whatever Heroku provided. And we had changed already the default version of Ruby since then, but there's obviously just like a ton of customers who just didn't bother to update their version of Ruby. And then we also supported Ruby 1.8.7 afterwards, after we launched Cedar. And especially back in those days, like there was a ton of stuff just still running on Ruby 1.8.7. And so we didn't just want to like immediately drop support for those versions of Ruby, like when Ruby core was like, we're not going to support this anymore. And the sunset period wasn't like a really well graphed out process back then. And so I was doing backport for our customers, like security patches from newer versions of Ruby. And so instead of just like making them be these one-off things that just ran on Heroku, but you couldn't get locally, we talked to Max, and I got brought on to basically be like the second or third release manager for Ruby 1.9.7 and 1.9.2, basically maintaining security patches for another year so our customers could pretty much move off of it.
That's really cool. So it kind of came out of trying to help your customers on Heroku transition better, and then all of a sudden, like, you just kind of moved into that role for Ruby kind of as a whole for the next couple of years. Is that kind of a good way to put it?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like if you're going to do the work and actually do the backporting, like you might as well upstream it to the rest of like the Subversion repository, and there's no reason to keep it, I guess, like private.
Sure. That's awesome. So you've kind of hit on earlier, if you've ever deployed anything at Heroku, you've probably used something that you've written. I guess I'm really curious to hear, you've been at Heroku for a long time. What are kind of the different projects you've worked on there? Or maybe also like, what's kind of like your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, so my day-to-day definitely varies to, I guess, start from the top. And it really depends on kind of the stuff that is going on in both the community ecosystem. I've handed a lot of so I used to be the Ruby language owner for like 6 or 7 years at Heroku. And then I handed a lot of that work off to Richard, but I still help out from time to time and still keep up with a lot of stuff going on in the Ruby community. Like I'm still on the Ruby security team for the language and stuff. So we get heads up on like what stuff is coming down the pipe with regards to some of those things. And so like as an example, like last year when Rails was working on the active source stuff, like Richard was on paternity leave. And so I was looking at like, how do we support that on Heroku so it works like on the platform. And I worked with our legal team because we identified that like the software that was being used was using a open source license, AGPL, that wasn't supported like by like Salesforce. Like we actually had contracts that said we cannot run any AGPL software on any Salesforce infrastructure. And just like going through reading the licensing, like I know Basecamp actually pays for a license for that software. And we wanted to obviously like get it to work on Heroku, but also for the broader community to have a like better free alternative. So just working with the Rails core team, I was able to submit like a pull request that provide an alternative PDF compression thing to make that work. So it varies. So that's an example of like working with stuff in the community. But there's also just like doing support tickets. Like, so I'm on the languages team, and basically we have like language owners per language, and they're responsible for the entire experience of building and deploying an app, running the app on the platform, doing documentation, answering support tickets. So I help out with basic stuff across the board, across various languages, as well as just like internal infrastructure stuff as well. And probably most recently, I'm working on a ton of stuff around containers and kind of build packs. And we recently got this project called Cloud Native Build Packs in the CNCF as a sandbox project. So I'm pretty excited about that stuff.
Awesome. Is there like a specific team you're on at Heroku, or you kind of bounce around?
The languages team. I've been on basically some iteration languages team for most of my time at Heroku. I actually originally started in support for like my first 15 months at Heroku, and then have been doing language stuff for the rest of my time.
Cool. I think you mentioned just now you've done some stuff for other languages at Heroku. What are some of those other languages you've supported?
So we had like our Python person left last year, and while we were trying to hire someone, I was basically the steward and was maintaining our Python support for 2 months while that's been out. I've helped with like some Node.js security stuff that we've done like in-house. Like I've been paged for various things, and just from working in both the Ember community and can't really do Rails without Node, I feel like these days, at least on the front end side. So have exposure from that. And so I've helped out with some of that stuff, some stuff with Go. And so it's kind of been all over the board. And then we also support JRuby on the platform. So helped out a little bit with some of the Java stuff as well. Like we launched CI support, and I helped out with getting some of that stuff documented while our Java person was out on PTO.
So pretty much every language, it sounds like.
Yeah, a good mix across the board for sure.
That's cool. Another thing I want to talk to you about, mRuby, M being like for embedded Ruby, correct?
Yeah, embeddable Ruby. Yeah.
We haven't really talked much about that project on this show. And to be honest, what I have said about mRuby so far is about all I know about it. So I'd love to kind of hear more about like use cases for mRuby and like what you do with the mRuby team.
Yeah, so mRuby is an interesting project, and in some ways I wish it was used more on various things. So I think one of the reasons that it isn't as popular in the Ruby community, especially on the Western front, because it does have a fairly small but vibrant community out in Japan. Like it's being used in commercial products as ways to like have pluggable stuff inside like firmware and other things. I think it's because it's like hard to find a use case for it, right? Like you go into like using Ruby and you have this like large ecosystem of Ruby gems, and it's like this. Most of the Ruby developers you're going to talk to are very web focused, right? Like you probably came in doing stuff with Rails. You probably, if you aren't doing stuff with Rails, you have something on top of Sinatra or Hanami or something like that, right? And so there's just like a lot of focus on doing web development things. And even if you aren't and you're just doing like CLI stuff, like Ruby's still pretty good at doing a lot of those pieces. And so I think for a lot of people, there isn't like at least like apparent use case for something like mRuby. Like why would I go look into it or dig into it? And that's kind of why I think it's just not as popular out here in the West, and why you just don't hear a lot about that stuff. Some of the stuff that's really neat about mRuby is that it's meant to be like a much lower memory footprint and smaller. And so I was doing a bunch of stuff around CLI development with mRuby, which I haven't really done a lot of work on in 2 years. But when I was looking into it, like the boot time for mRuby was like 10 times smaller than booting an MRI, which was really cool. So you get like much faster ramp up time for that kind of stuff. So it makes it a really good use case for doing stuff in scripts. Like if you're scripting something and then you want to have like a small thing that you can run. And kind of the main competitor that I would probably associate with mRuby would be like something like Lua would be more akin to like a language that you would pick that you use mRuby for. So the embeddable part really means like not necessarily embedding on devices, but embedding in other programming languages. So I think like the most popular one is like you have some C thing, and then you want to be able to have some scripting language that you can program stuff into. So you could embed the mRuby VM in there, and then you can basically write Ruby syntax that can work with your C program.
Okay, that makes sense because I recently worked on a project with a friend, and he was putting Ruby like inside WebAssembly so that I could like throw Ruby commands from JavaScript, get a result. And one of the Ruby implementations, like he mentioned using, was mRuby, and that makes sense why that would be a good candidate for that.
Yeah, there's some pretty neat projects out there in the wild that use mRuby. Like there's one, there's an mRuby Nginx module that you can use and basically builds an mRuby VM thing inside of that you can use with Nginx. And so you can use that instead of Lua. And so I actually use this as part of the static build pack for basically allowing people to configure an Nginx thing with just like a JSON file. So I use mruby to basically parse the JSON and then basically do like Nginx configuration. And I think that's probably one of the most popular and like applicable kind of things that you could like as a practical concrete thing you can use mruby for, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, that's awesome. One more question about mruby before we move on. So you mentioned it has like up to a 10x smaller footprint. What are some of the things that contribute to that?
So a lot of the data structures and stuff will be will by default be tuned for using less memory. So I think like on Ruby, especially with the fact that Rails is such a big part of it, you're starting to see stuff like a JIT. We just got the JIT in Ruby 2.6. And these are things that are probably akin to what you would think of when you're talking about like Java or the JVM, which are inherently probably not considered the language you would go to for doing like scripting stuff. Like, hey, I want to write the scripts, let me run it. The JVM or Java is not like the language you'd probably go for. And so Ruby is like kind of in this balance of like trying to be both a general purpose scripting language and also like this thing that's being run kind of as like a daemon, like a Rails server. And so there's tuning in other things that are part of the data structures. One of the other things that's really neat about mruby is that like there's no require. So you're not paying that like file time costs when you're booting up an mruby app that you would in Ruby. So like if I want to load like some type of library in mruby, there's like a build step as part of mruby generally. And so the mruby binary that you can build will include all of the libraries and things in it. So when you boot it up, it'll actually all be in memory already. So you don't pay any of that IO cost. So like the moment that you start using Ruby gems and all that stuff, like it becomes much more expensive to boot your MRI app. And so that's like one probably the big differences. The other things, and since it's meant to be small, like by default, you aren't given access to like probably all the methods that you're used to. And so there's like an array extension library, for instance, that's part of the core that you can basically configure mruby to be like, oh, I need these methods, so please build with like this other dependency. And so by default, like the kind of core stuff is much smaller. So there is this kind of like, because of the use case it's being used for, to only like pull in the libraries that you actually need and not pull in extra stuff just because it's there. So the standard library, and there's like a core and standard library. So like core is much smaller, and then standard library is things that are built into mruby, but you have to explicitly like pull them in when you build it. And there's some things in mruby, because it's not just like an embeddable Ruby that is just the Ruby that you expect. So there is this concept that you need to pull in like all these other libraries into it. So things like operating system level concerns, like threads and things, aren't built into standard lib like they are in MRI, because mruby can be run on things that aren't like your desktop or server, right? So it can also be embedded on ARM devices and cross-compiled for those things. So threading and operating system level things and processes that you're used to in MRI don't necessarily make sense if you can't expect those kind of things under the hood.
That's so fascinating. Another project you mentioned, you said you did some node work at Heroku, and you kind of hinted at that you did some Ember.js work. Are you a part of any kind of like Ember.js related projects, as far as like not like something built with Ember, but actual like Ember core itself?
So most of my connections from Ember go back from my bundler days, basically getting to know Yehuda, and then he introduced me to Tom. And so over the last few years, I've helped out with various things like the Fastboot website and other things like the emberjs.com websites. I believe still, it's still hosted on Heroku. So I helped kind of broker and help with some of the sponsorship stuff there. Because of all the most of my help with Ember has been like infrastructure related. So at one point I wrote an Ember.js build pack that got used and basically have been part of like the Ember learning team, though I'm not super active on it as I used to be, but they reach out to me sometimes when they need help with various things. And so I've just helped out with like kind of underneath plumbing of like piecing stuff together. So like the Ember Fastboot website, I remember flying out to EmberConf and spending the weekend with Tom and basically trying to get that website up and running and getting Fastboot working because you need like a server-side node thing to actually use Fastboot. So a lot of my stuff has been around deployment and I guess like build stuff more than actually writing Ember. Like I've never actually written an Ember app, fun fact. But yeah, a lot of my stuff has been around like just like core infrastructure, like helping support the Ember team in that sense.
Cool. Okay, before I move on to that, so there's several projects that you've mentioned you're involved in or have been involved in the past. I'm sure there are others. What are like some of your favorites to work on or to be a part of?
Just like general open source projects.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they've all been really, I guess, like great learning experiences. Probably the most nerve-wracking project I've ever been involved in has been Bundler. It was my first real open source project. So I would not recommend necessarily having that be the thing that you wait to cut your teeth on. Though the Bundler team is actually really great nowadays. I think Andre and company have done a great job of making it super friendly for new people to get involved with and tagging issues. But that was definitely not the case when I joined the project.
Sure.
Some of the stuff that I learned really, I learned and I was lucky having Yehuda around, but learned the hard way was when I was a maintainer. If you look at the old like 1.0 releases, so I joined like right after 1.0 released, I was still learning a bunch of stuff, and Carl and Yehuda were handing a bunch of that stuff off. And like, if you look, like there was a period where basically every other release was yanked from Ruby Gems, and that's because we like messed up. And so like, happens to all of us. And what better project than to do that on critical infrastructure? So that was a pretty rough, but great learning experience on like stability and like the importance of like how hard it is to like do stuff right. I know the team gets a lot of flack for messing up, but it's a really hard project to do right. And when you do mess up, it's like really easy to mess someone up, with that. And it's just really also hard to just catch the edge use cases. Like there's always something that you didn't think about and your test suite didn't have a test case for it because you had no idea that it was an edge case. And so that was just like a really eye-opening and enlightening project. Learned a lot of stuff, like a lot of the, I think, values and ideals I get from Yehuda. And he was instrumental in my career and stuff like the importance of like really good error messaging. And if there's a thing you can do for a user, just like do it for them without like, I think like a very obvious, I guess, like comparison. I was just on Twitter and I saw Steve Klabnik tweeting about like the Python REPL and how like if you don't do the right thing, instead of like they know what you want to do, like they know you want to exit the terminal, but instead of doing it for you, it will just like tell you how to do it. So it's like teaching you how to do it. But I feel like a big thing in Ruby is like kind of like this magic of like just do the right thing and like make it like if it's the thing you thought how it should work, then just like make it work that way. And so it's kind of a value difference. But those are things that I got from Yehuda working on the Bundler project. Like if you can make people's lives easier, kind of just like and remove steps, like you can generally make better software. And I think that also spells out a lot in like a lot of the Heroku products that I've touched.
I feel like that's a a philosophy that Rails has in general been really good about kind of like promoting, or Ruby even. I coming from Python, I felt that a lot. Just seeing the like, oh yeah, here's how to do it. There's one way to do it. And then Rails or Ruby was always kind of like, here's a bunch of options, but we're gonna Rails always would be like, here we've already thought of that for you, so here you go, which I like. I think that's really interesting. When was it that Bundler 1.0 came out, by the way?
It was when Rails 3 was coming out, so that was like, God, that was a long time ago. I don't even remember the year. It had to have been like 2011, I want to say 2011, 2012, somewhere around there.
It's probably about right. I joined Rails like in 2010, mid 2010. So I did a little bit of 2.3, and I remember the like config.gem stuff that you had to do, and then moving that all over to the gem file with Bundler. Did you guys have a lot of stuff that you had to do on Heroku to support that?
Yeah, Butler on Heroku is actually really rough. That was like around the time so I was actually a customer of Heroku before joining the company, and I definitely remember like the config.gem days, and they were definitely rough times. I remember my first like job that I got doing Ruby full time out of grad school, and it would like take you a whole day to like get the app running on your laptop locally. And I think Bundler changed a lot of that. And so like the early days of Bundler, I don't know if you used Bundler back in the like point 0.7 to point 0.9 days, were pretty rough because they changed the kind of like, I guess like what Bundler was actually doing. So I remember originally like Bundler didn't have a lock file, and then they added it into point 0.9, and it used to by default vendor everything, but now like when you bundle install, right, like it will install stuff by default into your system gems. And so they got a lot of feedback about like, oh, I have like system gems, like why do you put it in the sandbox thing? But you can still use like --path today to like tell it to install everything for a project into a separate folder, which is what we do on Heroku. And it kind of makes it like for support on Heroku is great because it allows you to, if you are debugging customers app and you're installing and setting up, you can just kind of remove that entire directory and also remove all the gems and stuff associated with it. So it's been great in that sense. But like in the 0.9 days, they had this thing where you had to like bundle install, but then you had to like unlock and then lock the gem file.lock. And it was like pretty messy. So I'm very happy with how they got it in 1.0. And I remember as a customer, like I thought Bundler was like the greatest thing since like sliced bread when I saw Yehuda come and demo it at the local Austin Ruby conference, Lone Star Ruby. And we actually moved a project over to it. And then, we're deploying it on Heroku. And then basically like every version of Bundler in 0.9 would break our app. So like every time Heroku upgraded Bundler, it was like a pretty rough experience just because like they weren't really compatible. So the backwards compatibility thing is the thing that is super, I guess, important and special to me. And so when I joined Heroku was like right around the time like Bundler 1.0 was coming out, probably in the next 6 months after I joined. And so I had a personal vested interest feeling that customer pain. So that's how I got involved with the Bundler project and basically worked with Carl and Yehuda on 1.0 and kind of the needs that Heroku had for it. And that's really how I got involved with the project. And they actually gave me like commit bit before I even like read any of the source code at one point. And they were like, here you go. Like you should be helping out the project. And so that's how I got involved with all that stuff.
It's awesome. You unintentionally segued perfectly into what I want to talk to you about next. Lone Star Ruby, was that the precursor to Keep Ruby Weird?
Yeah, I mean, in many senses, it was the like local conference we had in Austin for the majority, like in my early days of living in Austin, and they stopped it for a year and then they kind of didn't bring it back. And so, we like Lone Star was great. They for a while it was run by Jim Freeze, and then it got handed off to I think Lance and Mondo, I think from the Austin community, and then I don't really know the details of like what happened afterwards, but we did notice that there was a gap, and we wanted to do kind of our own take on the conference scene, and also like we wanted to reason like one of the big reasons for doing Keep Ruby Weird was for me personally was like I wanted a way to have an excuse for my friends to come visit me in Austin, who happen to also be mostly Rubyists. And we also wanted to kind of do our own take of like making a good experience for people visiting. So for instance, Lone Star was actually a great local conference in the sense that there was ample parking. It was kind of up north. So you had to drive to it. Like it was not within walking distance of anything that if you were visiting Austin that you'd want to go to. Whereas on the flip side, we kind of focused on other things. So we put it downtown, which actually made it a worse experience for someone who's local, unless you like live downtown, because parking in any downtown metropolitan area sucks. And so that was kind of, but like those were kind of the priorities that we had on some of that stuff.
It's fascinating because like putting on a conference like is like a thing like for me, like I do because like there's a gap of Ruby conferences in the Southeast, right? It's Southeast Ruby. But it is a little self-serving because I do like bringing Rubyists and like my friends, giving them an excuse to come to Tennessee. So I'm glad you said that so I don't feel like a complete horrible person.
I mean, I feel like organizing conferences, like unless you're getting paid to do it, like there are going to be selfish reasons you do anything, right? Like whether that makes you feel good and you're super altruistic, or there's excuses for doing stuff, right? Like part of it for me too, like yes, I want to bring my friends into town. The flip side of that as well is like I also understand I'm very privileged and fortunate. Like I've been able to travel a lot to a lot of conferences and be able to interact with all, like one of the best things about going to conferences is just being able to meet like we met at RailsConf, right? Like 2 years ago,
right.
Jason. And so being able to hang out and talk and get to know people and have friends like basically all over the world at this point for myself, I've been really fortunate. Like I was just in Singapore on a family vacation at the end of last year. And I was like meeting up with 2 people that live there that live there that I met from like 2013 or something. And so like we've kept in touch and it's been cool to be able to kind of do that kind of stuff. But like that's a really like lucky, like I definitely feel like that's like the 1% kind of thing. Like most people who program generally like have like other, like even if they are fortunate to have the finances to be able to do that kind of stuff, or their company's willing to sponsor it, like you have other obligations. Maybe you have a family, you have kids, you can't like afford to travel. And so being able to kind of bring other people that you use their projects or have interesting thoughts and conversations to your own town, I think is a really like great thing. And a way for me, like the Austin community helped me really a lot early on in my career. And I wanted a way, it was kind of my way of giving back to the Ruby community that, supported me like in my early time.
Yeah, it's similar for me. Like, I was fortunate enough, like the company I was working for when I first started going like RailsConf was like, they would help pay my way. And I was thinking about like, there's not a lot of companies that I guess like there's a good number that do, but there's a lot that don't. And like, I can't put together like a Ruby Central scale conference, right? But like, I feel like I can like, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids it a little bit and like bring it to a small city that's more feasible for like somebody from like Louisville, Kentucky to get down to Nashville. And so that's why like, I'm glad regional conferences still exist. I'm sad that Keep Ruby Weird no longer exist, but I understand.
We did for 5 years, and I feel like it's like part of it is like there was four of us in total, and only by the last year we only had three of the organizers, and it was kind of like pulling teeth to get one of them. Actually, Richard, like he just had a second kid, so like organizing another conference on top of like having a job, being involved in the open source community, taking care of two kids, and all that stuff. He also rents out like a house, I think, in Austin as well. So he has a lot on his plate, and so I think just like the fact that it is a labor of love, and I feel like it's really hard to sustain that model. And none of us were doing it for the money. Like we never went into it. Like I didn't make a penny off of Keep It Weird for doing it for 5 years. And so like it was really about just like doing the conference and wanting to kind of have that experience. You mentioned like the Ruby Central stuff. Like I love those conferences, but one things I really enjoy about the regional stuff more than kind of the broader national level things is that there's this like kind of like there's this really special like locality thing because it is this like big passion project. Not to say that the RailsConf or ReConf are not passion projects, but there's like a special thing when you can do it at a smaller scale that doesn't scale to like 800 or 1500 people, right? That you get to do like at Keep It Weird, one of the things that we did, we had a 90s theme this past year, and like one of the fun things was like, oh, what like 90s things can we do? Because we had that like really amazing but terrible looking like website that we had for Keep It Weird that was very 90s theme but modern CSS.
It's phenomenal.
So like we just ran with it, and so like one of the things that I did was like, oh, you know what was great in the 90s? Like Tamagotchi. So I bought like 3, I think, Tamagotchis that has like kind of icebreaker prizes. Richard does like this bingo thing where it like helps you get out of your seat and meet other people throughout the conference. And I thought that was just like a cool like 90s throwback. We had Keep It Weird like slap bracelets, and we bought ring pops and things like that. And I think some of that stuff just doesn't scale as well when you're doing a national level kind of thing. And so it's nice to, when you're at a smaller scale, that you get to be more experimental and kind of do these more like fun things or stuff that may be more thematic for like the area of the city that you're in. So like if people are coming to town for it, you can really show off like the city, and like, because you kind of want to like make it a good experience for people that are visiting, right?
Did you have to pay like top dollar for Tamagotchis?
I think you can get them on Amazon. I think I paid like 20-ish per pop. So
like you bought them brand new?
Yeah, brand new. Turns out they still make them.
Okay. I thought like they stopped making them in like 2001. So
no, like if you go to Japan, they still make them. Like you can go to like electronic stores and they have them. And I feel like there's been a resurgence of like 90s things recently, like just like retro style games, retro style like whatever, right? And so you can get Tamagotchis. There's even like while I was doing research on this stuff, like there's even some like really fancy Tamagotchis. So like you can get Tamagotchis that have, I think, like near field communication or some way to talk to other Tamagotchis, and like so you can have like this like weird Tamagotchi multiplayer kind of thing. But those are like $100 or something, so they get like really expensive.
Today I learned that. I feel like I'm about to like in this episode go down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, that was the summary of like part of my organizing experience of this last Keep It Weird, where it's like what, like we were looking at like making pogs too. It's just like, oh, we can make custom. Remember those things like back in school? Like we can make custom Keep It Weird pogs and like have that stuff. So yeah, it was pretty fun.
I remember talking to you, I think it was maybe 2 RailsConfs ago. It was right before I put on my first Southeast Ruby. And I was just so enamored, like, with all the ideas and, like, wisdom you shared. I was so sad. I am still so sad I never got to go to a Keep It Weird. It just seemed like such a, like, well-thought-out conference.
I mean, maybe it comes out that way when I talk about it, but like I feel like every conference has like stuff that it does really well and stuff that you kind of slide under the carpet a little bit. I don't know. Should we just talk about conference organizing? Happy to dig into that stuff too.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff that I think was really because we didn't have a big budget, and I think 4 organizers is actually a lot of organizers, but it's not like having a full team behind it, like the RubyConf and RailsConf and Ruby Central and some of the other more professional conferences. I was actually involved with Heroku's 2 conferences we ran Waza both years, and so like that was completely on the opposite end of the spectrum where the company is okay losing like money on it and is willing to put money into it. You can do like pretty high production stuff. And whereas Keeper Weird felt like the complete opposite, where it's this like scrappy thing where it's like trying to minimize the cost but still make it a special event. One of the things that I remember telling you back at RailsConf was, like it's a lot of work to put on a conference. So in order to not burn out, like you got to be respectful of your own time too. But like pick the few things that you want to focus on and like kind of just do the bare minimum that checks stuff off for the rest of it. And that I think really works really well for us at Keep It Weird. So as an example, like we never had like banner ads or like, I guess like proper like stuff that like if you went to our venue, you could not tell it was a Keep It Weird conference. We did it at the Alamo Draft House Ritz, which is on 6th Street in Austin. And if you went into the theater, which we rented out, like there's nowhere that was a sign that said you were at Keep It Weird. So we just like didn't do any of the like kind of bare minimum stuff that I think a lot of conferences do that like makes it feel like a conference that you're going to. And I think at this last one, there's like 2 theaters and there was only a sign that was said like weird one way and like not weird the other way. And so that was like kind of our only signage. So like, it was like, we just didn't do a lot of kind of the other stuff that I think you'd come to expect when you go to a conference. And that, like having a weird theme, I think just like allowed us to play on that and be like, well, it'd be weird to not do that thing. And so I think that we're really lucky about having that kind of stuff there. So like there were certain things that we did care about, right? And so each of the different organizers had things that were really important to them. So like Caleb really cared a lot about like name tags, like the signs that you wear to tell people who you are. And so we went through a bunch of different renditions and kind of settled on this like wood style thing for I think like years, I want to say 2 to 4. I think we did a plastic thing from the same guy this last year. But he just like he put all this time and energy because he wanted to have a thing that you didn't want to throw away. Like I feel like if you go to a lot of conferences, you get these like plastic whatever name badges, and like you end up with like they were special when you go to a few of them, but then like when you go to a bunch of them, you just have like this large collection of them, and you kind of just like toss them out unless you're just gonna collect all of them. And so we want to have a thing where like you would feel comfortable like wearing it at not Keep It Weird. So not a lot of branding, a little bit to know that you're at Keep It Weird, but like it's really about the person, right? And so like most of the text on there was no text that said Keep It Weird. It made like I think at one point we had keep and then whatever your name was weird. One year we just had the weirdo, and so like there was a lot of stuff where it's like it was this thing that felt special and that you wanted to keep. Our first year we had name tags that were these like little chalk like paper, and then we paid a calligrapher to like hand do each name. But unfortunately, if you got it wet, like it would kind of wipe away because it was chalk. So not a great idea in hindsight, but it was like pretty cool,
Sure.
Concept. And so, like kind of picked a few things. Like for me, like I cared a lot about the content, the schedule, and speakers. And so the stuff that I did was I like picked speakers up, I hand wrote them thank you notes. We would all work on speaker gifts, stuff like that. But then like just kind of some of the experiences that I enjoyed being a speaker and trying to bring those things to our conference.
Yeah, the 2 things you told, well, out of all the things you told me, 2 of which that like I took away and did like my first year and have done since were the handwritten note for each speaker. Because I think like speaking at a conference, like, oh man, like that would be so nice to know somebody took like 3 minutes and sat down to like tell me they cared. And then the other thing, you talked about like having long breaks between talks. And so that's something we've done every year is we do literally just 30 minutes for talk and then a 30-minute break right after. So we don't do like Q&A. We just do like, if you want to ask questions, go find the speaker during this 30-minute slot. And that is probably that thing right there is the thing, like when I get feedback from the conference, is the thing people love the most is all the time to like meet people, which lines up like super well with what I wanted. And that like, kind of like you said earlier, like going to a conference affords you the opportunity to meet so many people you wouldn't normally meet. So,
yeah, to give credit where credit's due, I actually got that from Ruby Lungdemann, which is this conference in Lyon, France. They actually had that exact format, and it was really awesome. And so I'm sad that that conference isn't around anymore, or maybe it's coming back, but I don't think it is. But yeah, they were, I think that was the first conference I went to that had that exact format.
Their ideas living on through other conferences. Terence, thanks so much for joining us. Chris, do you have anything else you want to add, ask, anything like that?
No, I was just quietly listening to organizing conferences. You guys have been, it's just an enormous amount of work. So huge respect to you guys for doing that. It's like, I remember going to, Ruby Midwest in Kansas City. Like got dragged out to that one time, and that was kind of where I got into the community. And so I feel like putting on these conferences, especially the small ones where you can go meet everybody, are just like really valuable. So yeah, thanks to you guys for that.
I think it's pretty great when you come to Southeast Ruby and like people who are there like, oh my God, that's Chris Oliver. Like it has nothing to do with me. I just think that's cool. Like, to see. So
yeah, it's been kind of strange, sit in my basement and all these people know me. It's weird.
Awesome. Terence, where can the people find you on the World Wide Web?
I have a Twitter. It's HONE02. Always feel free to reach out to me that way. That's probably the main way. I think I talk to people via conference stuff. Other than that, I guess you could always actually just open a support ticket at Heroku and then in the ticket say, please assign this to Terence. I've had people do that before. And then my email is my Twitter handle at gmail.com. So you can always email me that way as well.
Awesome. What's the next conference you're going to?
The next one is Dev Nexus, which is a Java conference. I'll be going to that in March, I think. And then hopefully I'll be making my way to Kaigi, and then I will definitely be at RailsConf as well. So at worst, you'll see me at RailsConf, I guess.
Awesome. One other thing, did I see you on the committee for another conference in Europe?
Yuruko. I don't know how Floor wrote me into doing stuff for Yuruko, but
I saw that the other day. I was like, wait a second. That's awesome.
Yeah, we were hanging out in Code Days, PJ's conference out in Buffalo, and I was telling her about Keeper Beach stuff. It was like our last year, and then Yuruko just ended, like the last one. I don't know if you guys know how Yuruko does their stuff. It's actually really cool, and I kind of wish there was something like this in the US, but they basically have this conference that rotates around Europe, and so basically each city that wants to host it the next year, kind of like the Olympics, they do a presentation, and then there's some voting mechanism that changes from year to year, whether it's noise or people do ballots, but eventually a city that is the most popular one gets picked, and all this stuff gets handed off. So it kind of averts this whole burnout problem, because it's always a new team, and the old team is around to always help out and give advice, and you have all the years of experience. And it's been how some of the great European Ruby regional conferences have come about, like Railsbury. They did it one year and then realized they love organizing conferences. So they organized Railsbury for the next 3 years after that. And so it's definitely a cool thing. But Flora did a presentation for Rotterdam. So Yurko is going to be in Rotterdam this year. And we were talking about it. And then she asked if I wanted to help out with certain things. And so that's how I ended up on that committee, I guess.
I think that's so awesome. Well, before I drag us down another rabbit hole, I'm going to end it here and talk to you later.
Take care. Thanks for having me.